I held the envelope in my hands, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt my heart drop into my stomach. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a bill. It was a birthday card decorated with delicate flowers and elegant cursive. But in my world, a letter from my mother in law isn't just a greeting, it's a declaration of war disguised as a peace treaty. As I stood there in my kitchen, the very kitchen she once tried to claim as her own, I realized that the peace I had fought so hard to build was about to be burned to the ground. How do you tell someone that their kindness feels like a knife to the throat? And more importantly, how do you stop a ghost from moving back into your guest room? You see, I'm 36 now, and I've spent 14 years of my life with my husband. We've built a world together. 10 years of marriage, 2 beautiful kids who are 6 and 2, and his 24-year-old son from a previous relationship who still lives with us. It's a full house. It's a loud house. It's a house that finally felt like home after years of walking on eggshells. But for over a decade, there was a shadow over everything we did. That shadow has a name, and it belongs to my mother-in-law. For 10 years, it was the same pattern. She would overstep, she would gaslight, she would disrespect me in my own home, and then, when the tension became unbearable, she would suggest we start fresh. We must have had a dozen fresh starts. Each one felt like wiping a chalkboard clean, only to realize the person holding the chalk had no intention of writing anything different. It was a cycle of emotional exhaustion that left me feeling drained and invisible. But the breaking point, the moment that finally shattered the glass, that didn't happen until 2022. Back then, things were already tight. My husband and I both work from home. With 4 people already living in a 3-bedroom house, space wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity for our sanity. But then, my mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law hit a rough patch. They needed a place to stay. My husband, being the man he is, kind, perhaps to a fault, wanted to help. I wanted to be a good wife. I wanted to be the bigger person. So, we sat down and drew a line in the sand. 3 months. That was the deal. 3 months max to get back on their feet and find a permanent situation. We agreed to it. She agreed to it. Or so I thought. The moment they crossed the threshold, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It wasn't like having guests, it was like being colonized. Suddenly, the pantry I had organized was inefficient. The garage space where we kept our essentials was being eyed for her overflow. She didn't just move in, she took over. I remember sitting at my desk, trying to focus on a Zoom call while she paced the hallway, making demands about how the house should be run. It's a surreal feeling, being told how to live in a home you pay the mortgage for. Every morning felt like a battle for territory. She would wake up and immediately begin criticizing. The way I parented, the way I cleaned, the way we spent our time. She acted like she was the matriarch and we were just teenagers living under her roof. And the noise, that was a whole other issue. My son was 3 at the time. If you've ever had a 3-year-old, you know they don't have a quiet setting. They are tiny engines of chaos. But my mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law, they like to sleep until 2 p.m. every single day. I'd be in the kitchen trying to keep a toddler entertained and fed, while she would emerge from the guest room like a dark cloud, telling us to keep it down. In my own house, at noon. I felt like a prisoner in my own living room. We were providing them a roof. We were supporting them while they were sick. We were taking care of the grandmother-in-law's needs. And not once, not a single time, did a thank you cross her lips. In her mind, this wasn't a favor. It was her right. As the 3-month mark approached, the tension reached a fever pitch. We had plans. We had birthdays coming up, holidays we wanted to celebrate with our kids. But every time we mentioned having people over, she would get upset. She'd act like we were asking her for permission to use our own dining room. It was suffocating. And then came the day the calendar hit that 90-day mark. My husband and I sat down to talk about the transition. But the moment the subject of her moving out came up, she looked at us with total blankness. She denied everything. The 3-month agreement never happened. The timeline we'd all sat around the table and discussed, a figment of our imagination. She told us she wasn't going anywhere. She was using our address for her mail, she was settled in, and she had no intention of leaving. That's when we realized we had to get formal. My husband wrote up a notice, a clear written statement that she needed to find a new place. It was sitting on the dining room table, waiting for the right moment for him to sit her down and have a calm adult conversation. We wanted to handle it with some shred of dignity. But the universe had other plans. My young son, being the helpful little guy he is, saw the paper on the table. He didn't know it was a legal notice. He just knew it was a piece of paper that looked important. He picked it up, toddled over to his grandmother, and handed it to her with a big, innocent smile. Our very own personal process server at 3 years old. The silence that followed lasted only a second before the explosion happened. She came storming out of the room, the paper flapping in her hand like a flag of war. She was screaming. Her face was contorted with a rage I had never seen directed at me so openly. She called us assholes. She looked me dead in the eye and called me a word I won't even repeat. And then, in a final act of defiance, she ripped the notice into shreds right in front of us. She told us it didn't apply to her. She told us she lived here now. She got right in my face, her voice low and venomous, trying to escalate the situation into a physical confrontation. She started calling other family members, crying into the phone, playing the victim, telling them we were throwing an old woman out onto the street. My husband finally stepped in, putting himself between us. But the damage wasn't just done. It was permanent. They stayed for 1 more month after that. It was 30 days of pure, unadulterated hell. Every walk to the kitchen was a gauntlet. Every time I saw her, I felt a physical sickness in my gut. Finally, they moved out of state. The day the door closed behind them for the last time, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. I didn't just close the door, I locked it. I went fully no contact. No calls, no texts, no fresh starts. I was done. For nearly 4 years, there was peace. My husband still talked to her, and I was okay with that. I didn't want to sever his bond with his mother, even if I couldn't stand her. I'd even ask how she was doing or how his grandmother was doing before she passed away a year later. I even sent a kind condolence card when the grandmother died because I did care. But for me, the wall was up. The boundaries were set. I had my life back. My kids were growing up in a home that didn't feel like a pressure cooker until this January. I was checking the mail, expecting the usual flyers and bills, when I saw it. The birthday card. I opened it, expecting a standard happy birthday note. Instead, 3 pages of neatly written script fell out. And as I started to read, I realized that the piece of the last 4 years was just the eye of the storm. I stood there at the kitchen island, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. You know that feeling when someone says all the right things, but every instinct in your body is screaming that something is wrong? That's exactly where I was. On the surface, the letter was beautiful. It was written on high quality stationery. The handwriting was elegant. It started with Dear O.P. and it spoke of peace, clarity, and fresh starts. But as I read those 3 pages, I wasn't seeing a peace treaty. I was seeing a masterclass in manipulation. She wrote about how it had been over 3 years since we last spoke. She said she'd taken the time to reflect on how to share her thoughts with kindness and honesty. She talked about how our family story is complex and difficult. And that's where the first alarm bell went off in my head. Complex? Our story wasn't complex. It was very simple. She had moved into my home, disrespected my boundaries, called me a name I can't repeat, and refused to leave until she was practically forced. There's nothing complex about a person lighting your house on fire and then complaining about the smoke. I kept reading, searching for one specific word. I was looking for sorry. I was looking for I apologize for how I treated you. I was looking for I'm sorry I screamed at you in your own kitchen. But as my eyes scanned the pages, that word never appeared. Not once. Instead, she wrote, I don't want to dwell on past hurts or old disagreements. Instead, I hope we can move forward with understanding and respect. Think about that for a second. Imagine someone robs you, and then a few years later, they send you a letter saying, I don't want to dwell on the fact that I took your money. Let's just move forward with respect. It's a classic tactic, isn't it? By calling it dwelling on the past, she was effectively telling me that if I brought up what she actually did, then I was the one being difficult. I was the one stuck in the past. She was the evolved one, the one moving forward, while I was just holding on to old wounds. And then came the part that really made my skin crawl. She thanked me for including her when I sent photos of the kids. Now let's be clear, I hadn't sent her a single thing in 4 years. My husband had. He was the one maintaining that bridge. But by phrasing it that way, she was trying to create a false sense of intimacy, a shared history that didn't exist anymore. She talked about how much those pictures meant to her because she couldn't be there to snuggle those littles. It felt like a guilt trip wrapped in a hug. She was positioning herself as the doting grandmother who was being kept away from her grandchildren by a cold, distant daughter-in-law. The letter ended with her saying she would honor my need for space while protecting her own well-being. That was the final twist of the knife. Protecting her own well-being? From what? From the daughter-in-law she insulted? From the son who gave her a place to live for free? It was such a subtle way of saying that I was the toxic one. I was the person she needed protection from. I sat the letter down and felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I've spent years in therapy unlearning the gaslighting I endured during those 3 months she lived with us. I've worked so hard to build a home where I feel safe, where I don't have to look over my shoulder, where I don't have to rehearse my sentences before I speak. And in 3 pages of kind words, she had managed to make me feel like I was back in that cramped, tense house in 2022. I tried to explain this to my husband. He's a good man. I love him. But he has that peacekeeper DNA. He wants everyone to just get along. He looked at the letter and saw an olive branch. He saw a mother trying to make amends. He didn't see the barbs hidden in the prose. He didn't see that she was setting the stage to come back into our lives without ever having to say, I'm sorry. And then, about 2 weeks ago, the other shoe finally dropped. We were sitting on the couch after the kids had gone to bed. It's usually our quiet time, our time to decompress. But I could tell he had something on his mind. He was fidgeting, not really looking at me. So, he started, his voice a little too casual. My mom called. She's planning a trip. I felt that familiar cold stone settle in my chest. A trip? Where? Here, he said. Well, to the area. She's coming at the end of June with her new significant other. They are staying for a week, and she's probably bringing her 2 dogs. I just stared at him. A week? In June? That was only a few months away. Where are they staying? I asked, my voice tight. A hotel or an Airbnb, he said quickly. She knows she's not staying here, but I want to have them over for dinner. He looked at me with this hopeful expression that broke my heart and infuriated me all at the same time. He started talking about how much he's learned about cooking over the last 4 years. He's become quite the chef, honestly. He's perfected these complex dishes, things he's really proud of. He said, I want her to come to the house so I can cook for her. I want her to see the life we've built. I want to show her these dishes I've perfected that she's never had. No, I said. It was the only word I could find. Just for dinner, he pleaded. One night, maybe 2. I don't want you to be antisocial. I want us to be a family again. We are a family, I told him. Me, you, and the kids. We are the family. She is the person who tried to destroy our peace. I am not comfortable with her in this house. This house is my safe space. It's the one place in the world where I don't have to feel like I'm walking on eggshells. The conversation went in circles. He asked what kind of apology I would need to be okay with it. And the truth? I didn't have an answer. Because after 10 years of fresh starts and 4 years of silence, what could a few words possibly change? An apology is a promise to do better. But she's broken that promise a dozen times before. I offered a compromise. I'll meet her in public, I said. A restaurant, a park, somewhere neutral where I have an exit strategy. Somewhere where if she starts her games, I can just stand up and walk away. But not here. Not in my kitchen. He didn't like that. He said it felt cold. He even suggested that if I was so uncomfortable, maybe I could just stay in our bedroom while they were here. Or I could leave the house for the evening. Can you imagine being a guest in your own home? Being told to hide in your room like a servant because your husband wants to impress the woman who treated you like garbage? The irony wasn't lost on me. He was asking me to recreate the exact environment that led to the no contact order in the first place. He was asking me to make myself small so she could feel big. What hurts the most is that he hasn't even talked to her yet about my boundaries. He's so focused on this fresh start fantasy that he's ignoring the reality of the woman he's dealing with. He's planning menus and picking out wine, while I'm sitting here wondering if I need to change the locks. I feel like I'm being gaslit by my own life. I'm being told that I'm the barrier to peace because I won't let a toxic person back into my living room. But is it really peace if it requires me to sacrifice my own sanity? Is it a fresh start if the person entering the room is still carrying the same baggage, the same entitlement, and the same lack of remorse. I have a few months before June. A few months to figure out how to stand my ground without tearing my marriage apart. But every time I look at that 3-page letter sitting on my counter, I don't see love. I see a warning. And I'm starting to realize that the hardest part of setting a boundary isn't making it. It's the absolute war you have to fight to keep people from crossing it. The silence in our house lately hasn't been the peaceful kind. It's been the heavy, pressurized kind of silence. The kind that feels like a storm is brewing just behind the drywall. Every time my husband walks into the kitchen, I see him looking at his cast iron pans, his stainless steel pots, the tools of the trade he's mastered over the last 4 years. He's proud of what he's become. He's found a passion in cooking, in the chemistry of flavors, in the way a perfectly seared steak or reduction sauce can bring people together. But when I look at those pans, I don't see a hobby. I see a peace offering to a woman who doesn't want peace. She wants submission. I just want her to taste the risotto, he told me the other night while he was doing the dishes. She's never had it like this. She's always complained that I couldn't cook. I want to show her I've grown. It broke my heart to hear him say that. Here is a 42-year-old man, a father, a successful professional, still trying to earn a good job from a woman who has spent decades making him feel like he's never enough. He thinks if the food is perfect, if the wine is expensive, if the house is spotless, then maybe, just maybe, she'll finally see him. She'll finally respect us. He's looking for redemption in a recipe, and he doesn't realize that to her, the food doesn't matter. What matters is that she's back in the house. What matters is that she's won. And then there was his suggestion, the one that's been playing on a loop in my head, making my blood boil every time I think about it. If you're really that uncomfortable, he'd said, you could just stay in our room while they're here for dinner. Or maybe you could take the kids to a movie. That way, you don't have to deal with her and I can still host her. I remember looking at him and feeling like I was seeing a stranger. Stay in our room? In the home I pay for? In the sanctuary I've spent 4 years purifying of her toxic energy? He was literally asking me to become a ghost in my own life. He was suggesting I hide away like a shameful secret so his mother could sit at my table, use my silverware, and pretend I didn't exist. It reminded me so much of 2022. It reminded me of those 3 months when she and the grandmother lived with us. Back then, I felt like a guest in my own skin. I'd walk into the kitchen to get a glass of water and feel her eyes tracking me, judging the way I held the glass, the way I breathed, the way I spoke to my children. By the end of those 3 months, I was a shell of a person. I was retreating further and further into myself, just to avoid the friction. And now, my husband, the man who is supposed to be my partner, my protector, my teammate, was asking me to go back into that shell. I had to sit him down. I had to look him in the eye and say, do you realize what you're asking me? You are asking me to be a refugee in my own home so that the person who traumatized me can feel comfortable. You're choosing her comfort over my safety. He looked at me with that wounded expression, the one that says he feels caught in the middle. But that's the thing about marriage. There is no middle. When you get married, you leave your parents and you cleave to your spouse. You build a new unit. You create a new perimeter. And when someone attacks that perimeter, you don't invite them in for risotto. You stand at the gate. I started thinking back to the day my son handed her that notice. It's funny now, in a dark way, thinking of a 3-year-old as a process server. But the memory of what followed isn't funny at all. I can still see her face, the way her features sharpened, the way her eyes turned cold and hard like flint. I can still hear the sound of the paper tearing. Rip, rip, rip. Each tear was a screw you to our authority as homeowners. Each tear was her saying, your rules don't apply to me. Your boundaries are a joke. And then she called me that word. A word that is designed to strip a woman of her dignity. She didn't say it in the heat of a momentary lapse. She said it with intention. She said it to hurt. She said it to establish dominance. And now I'm supposed to read a 3-page letter about fresh starts and clarity and forget that ever happened? I went back to the letter, reading it for the 10th time, trying to find the kindness my husband saw. I noticed something strange. She dated it as 2026. As 2026 begins, she wrote. It's currently 2024. Now, maybe it was just a typo. People make mistakes. But to me, it felt like something else. It felt like future faking. It's a tactic where a person talks about a beautiful, idealized future as if it's already happening, bypassing all the hard work, the apologies, and the accountability required to actually get there. She's already living in 2026 in her head, a year where we've all moved on and healed, and she's snuggling the littles on the couch. She wants the reward without the work. She wants the snuggles without the I'm sorry. And then there was that phrase, I will honor your need for space while protecting my own well-being. The more I thought about that, the angrier I got. She's protecting her well-being from me? I'm the one who hasn't called her. I'm the one who hasn't sent her a single mean text. I'm the one who simply disappeared from her life to find some peace. By saying she's protecting herself, she's subtly painting me as the aggressor. She's telling my husband and anyone else who reads that letter that I'm the dangerous one. I'm the one who needs to be handled with care and thoughtfulness. It's so incredibly condescending. It's the I'm the bigger person act, and she's playing it to perfection. My husband asked me, what kind of apology would be enough? And I told him the truth. I said, an apology isn't just words, honey. It's an acknowledgement of reality. If she can't look me in the eye and say, I am sorry I disrespected your home. I am sorry I called you names. And I am sorry I refused to leave when the time was up. Then an apology is just a lie told to get what she wants. The problem is, she'll never say those things because in her mind, she didn't do anything wrong. In her mind, she was the victim of a cold daughter-in-law who didn't want to help her family. She's the hero of her own story, and I'm the villain who's keeping the grandchildren away. I'm struggling with the disconnect. On one hand, I have this husband who I love, who is trying so hard to be a good son. On the other hand, I have this woman who is a master of the emotional long game. And in the middle, there's me, standing in my kitchen, looking at those perfected dishes and wondering if I'm about to lose the peace I spent 4 years fighting for. I told him I wouldn't allow her in the house. I told him my compromise, the public meeting, was final. He hasn't told her yet. He's procrastinating because he knows it's going to spark another explosion. He knows that the moment he says, OP isn't comfortable with you coming to the house, The mask of the kind, reflective mother-in-law is going to slip. The peace she promised in the letter is conditional. It's only there as long as she gets what she wants. The second she's told, no, we are going to see 2022 all over again. And I think that's what my husband is really afraid of. He doesn't want to cook her dinner because he loves her. He wants to cook her dinner because he's terrified of what will happen if he doesn't. And as for me, I'm done being the person who absorbs the blow so everyone else can feel fine. I'm 36 years old. I have 2 kids who are watching how I handle conflict. What am I teaching them if I let someone who called me a cunt sit at our dinner table? What am I teaching my daughter about self-respect? What am I teaching my son about how to treat a partner? I'm not being antisocial. I'm being anti-disrespect. And if that makes me the barrier in her letter, then I will wear that title like a badge of honor. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting a war that only you seem to see. While my husband was enthusiastically cataloging his spice rack and mentally pairing wines with a menu he hadn't even finalized, I felt like I was fortifying a castle against a siege he had personally invited. I'd watch him from the kitchen island, his face lit up with this boyish hope, and I'd feel this terrible twisting knot in my stomach. I loved him. I loved his passion, but I despised the woman he was trying so desperately to impress. You know, he said one evening, wiping down the counters after testing a new braised short rib recipe. She really has changed. That letter. It takes a lot for her to write something like that, to put herself out there. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until the fog cleared from his eyes. Put herself out there? She hadn't put anything out there except a carefully constructed narrative designed to absolve her of all guilt. But how do you explain to a man that the mother he loves is an emotional sniper? You can't just show him the bullet holes. He has to realize he's the one standing in the crosshairs. She hasn't changed, I said softly, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. She's just changed her tactics. He stopped wiping the counter. The air in the kitchen grew heavy. Why can't you just give her a chance? He asked, and there was real pain in his voice. It's been 4 years. She's getting older. I just want one nice dinner. Is that really too much to ask? It was the ultimate guilt trip, completely unintentional on his part, but devastating all the same. He wasn't asking me to forget the past. He was begging me to endure the present so he could have a fleeting illusion of a happy family. It's not just a dinner, I replied, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. It's the principle. It's the sanctuary of this house. When she called me that name, when she tore up that notice and screamed in our faces, she didn't just disrespect me. She disrespected us. She disrespected this home. And by inviting her back in, without a shred of genuine accountability, you're telling her that what she did was acceptable. You're telling her that if she waits long enough and writes a pretty letter, all her sins are forgiven. He looked down at the dish towel in his hands, his jaw tightening. So what? She's banished forever? I can never have my mother in my home again? I didn't say that, I countered, though part of me desperately wanted to. I said I offered a compromise. We meet in public, a restaurant, a park, somewhere neutral. If she truly wants a fresh start, if she truly wants to move forward with understanding and respect, like she claimed in that 3-page performance piece, then she will be perfectly happy to meet us at a nice restaurant where you can treat her to a wonderful meal. He sighed, a long, defeated sound. It's not the same. It's not my food. It's not my home. Your home, I reminded him gently, is also my home, and I need to feel safe in it. The conversation ended there, dissolving into that tense silence that had become our new normal. He didn't agree, but he didn't push it further that night. The problem was, the clock was ticking. End of June was looming closer, a dark cloud on the horizon of our calendar. A few days later, I was cleaning out the hall closet, sorting through old coats and winter gear, when I found a box of things from 2022. It was mostly junk. Old mail, a few receipts, some of my 3-year-old's aggressively enthusiastic finger paintings. But tucked at the bottom was a small, spiral-bound notebook. I recognized it immediately. It was the journal I had kept during those 3 hellish months when she and GMIL lived with us. I hadn't looked at it since they moved out. My therapist had suggested I write down my feelings as a way to cope with the gaslighting, a way to anchor myself to reality when my MIL was constantly trying to rewrite it. I sat down on the hallway floor, the cold hardwood biting into my legs, and opened it. The entries were short, sharp, and bruised. Day 14. She complained about the laundry detergent again, said it made her skin itch, and implied I bought the cheap stuff on purpose. I used the exact same brand she told me to buy. When I pointed this out, she said I must be washing them wrong. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Day 42. She told my husband I was being cold to her. He asked me to try harder. I spent all morning baking muffins for her and GMIL. She took one bite, said they were too dry, and left the rest on the counter. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. Day 78. The noise. It's constant. If it's not the TV blaring at 1 a.m., it's her pacing the halls. But if my son drops a toy at noon, she acts like we fired a cannon. I dread waking up. I dread being in my own living room. Reading those words, feeling the raw, visceral anxiety bleed off the pages, cemented my resolve. The woman who had written those entries was exhausted, defeated, and shrinking. I had spent 4 years rebuilding her. I had spent 4 years creating a life where I didn't have to lock myself in a bathroom to cry over dry muffins. I was not going to let that woman back into my house. Not for a perfected risotto, not for a fresh start, not for anything. That evening, I waited until the kids were asleep and my adult stepson was out with friends. I poured 2 glasses of wine, handed one to my husband, and sat down at the kitchen island across from him. The journal was sitting between us like a physical boundary line. I need you to listen to me, I said, my voice low and firm. Not as your mother's son, but as my husband. He looked at the journal, then up at me, his expression guarded. Okay, I'm listening. I found this today. I tapped the notebook. It's from 2022. I read it, and it reminded me of exactly how bad it was. It reminded me of how small I made myself so she could take up all the space. He started to say something, but I held up a hand. Please, let me finish. I know you want her to see how you've grown. I know you want to share your cooking with her. And I love that you want to do that. I love your passion. But you cannot use my peace of mind as the price of admission for her approval. I pushed the journal slightly toward him. You read her letter. You saw a woman reaching out. But look at the words she actually used. If you feel open, when the time feels right, protecting my own well-being. She's not apologizing. She's setting the terms of her return. She's dictating the narrative. She wants to come back, but she wants to do it on her terms, completely bypassing the wreckage she left behind. He looked down into his wine glass, his reflection distorted in the red liquid. I know she was awful, he admitted quietly. I know she hurt you. I I just hope that maybe with time we could move past it. Moving past it requires acknowledging it happened, I said gently. Has she ever, once, said she was sorry for calling me a cunt? He flinched. He hated that word. No, he whispered. Has she ever apologized for tearing up the notice? For screaming at us? For trying to turn the rest of the family against us? No. Then she hasn't changed, I said, the finality of it hanging in the air. She's just resting. And if you bring her into this house, you are telling her that she doesn't ever have to apologize. You're telling her that she can treat me however she wants, and eventually you'll just open the door and let her back in. He finally looked up, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. The little boy who wanted his mother's love, warring against the man who loved his wife. I won't do it, I told him, holding his gaze. I won't hide in my room. I won't leave my house. And I won't sit at a table and make small talk with a woman who has never shown me an ounce of respect. The compromise stands. You can meet her in public. You can rent an Airbnb with a kitchen and cook for her there, if that's what it takes. I will even help you pack up the pots and pans. But she does not cross this threshold. The silence that followed stretched out, thick and heavy. I waited. I watched him process the absolute finality in my voice. I wasn't asking anymore. I was stating a fact. Finally, he let out a long breath, a breath that seemed to carry the weight of 14 years of complicated family dynamics. Okay, he said, the word barely a whisper. Okay, she doesn't come here. Relief washed over me, so sudden and intense that I felt lightheaded. But it was immediately followed by a new, sharper anxiety. You have to tell her, I said. And you have to tell her soon. June is coming. He nodded slowly. I know. I'll call her this weekend. But the weekend came and went. And then another week. Every time I asked him if he had made the call, he had an excuse. He was too busy with work. She hadn't answered her phone. He wanted to wait for the right moment. He was stalling. He was terrified of the explosion he knew was coming. And as the days ticked by, that familiar knot of tension started to tighten in my chest all over again. The boundary had been set, but the war was far from over. The days turned into a slow, agonizing countdown. Every time my husband's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, my heart would skip a beat. Was this it? Was this the conversation where he finally told her the truth? But it never was. It was always a work email, a group chat with his friends, or an alert from a news app. The tension in our house was no longer a brewing storm. It was the suffocating humidity right before the sky breaks open. He was avoiding it. He was moving through the house with this forced casualness, talking about the kids' summer camp schedules and the latest documentary he watched. Everything except the massive, looming shadow of his mother's impending visit. I tried to give him grace. I really did. I know how hard it is to confront a parent, especially one who has spent decades perfecting the art of emotional manipulation. When you grow up with a mother who uses guilt as a primary language, setting a boundary feels like a betrayal. I could see the battle playing out behind his eyes every time the end of June was mentioned. He was terrified of her reaction, terrified of being the bad son, terrified of the inevitable fallout that would ripple through the rest of his family. But my empathy was running on fumes. We were in the living room one evening, folding laundry. The TV was on, low volume, some sitcom playing in the background. My 2-year-old was asleep upstairs, and my 6-year-old was drawing at the coffee table. It was a perfectly mundane domestic scene. And that's when my husband casually dropped the bomb. "So," he said, matching up a pair of socks, "I was thinking about the menu for Mom's visit. I think I'm going to do the seared scallops for the appetizer and then the braised short ribs for the main." I froze, a small t-shirt halfway folded in my hands. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "The menu?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "For where?" He didn't look up. He just kept folding. "Well, I figured we could just do it here. It's only one night, OP. Just a few hours. I'll do all the cooking, all the cleaning. You don't even have to talk to her much. Just be polite." It felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The air rushed out of my lungs, and for a second, all I could hear was the faint, canned laughter from the TV. He hadn't heard a word I said. The entire conversation we'd had, the journal, the tears, the clear, non-negotiable boundary I had drawn, he had just erased it. He had decided that his desire to play chef for his mother overrode my need to feel safe in my own home. I put the tissue down. My hands were shaking. I looked over at my 6-year-old, happily coloring, oblivious to the earthquake happening above his head. "We need to talk," I said, standing up. "Now, in the kitchen." He sighed, the sound heavy with annoyance, as if I was the one being unreasonable. He followed me into the kitchen, leaning against the counter and crossing his arms. The defensive posture was already in place. "I don't understand why this is such a big deal," he started before I could even speak. "It's one dinner. I haven't seen her in years. I want her to see my food." "You agreed," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that was cold and terrifyingly clear. "You sat right there not 2 weeks ago and you agreed she wouldn't come into this house. You told me you understood." "I know I said that," he deflected, looking away. "But I've been thinking about it and it just seems so extreme. To make her eat at an Airbnb or a restaurant? It's insulting. It's like we're punishing her." "We are punishing her!" I snapped, the words tearing out of me. "Or rather, we are holding her accountable for her actions. She called me a cunt in this very room. She tried to turn your entire family against us. She moved into our house, treated us like garbage, and then laughed in our faces when we asked her to leave. And you want to reward that behavior with seared scallops?" "She sent the letter," he argued, his voice rising to match mine. "She reached out. She's trying to fix things." "She's not trying to fix anything." I was practically begging him to see the reality. "She's trying to rewrite history. Did she apologize in that letter? Did she take ownership of a single thing she did? No. She talked about old wounds like they just magically appeared out of thin air. She's playing you, and you're letting her because you're too afraid to tell her no." The truth of it hung in the air between us, sharp and undeniable. He flinched as if I had struck him. His face went pale, and the anger drained out of him, replaced by a deep, sudden exhaustion. "I don't want to fight with you," he whispered, rubbing his eyes. "I just want my mom." The vulnerability in his voice almost broke me. Almost. But I had to stay strong. I had to protect the peace I had fought so hard to build. If I caved now, I would be telling him and her that my boundaries were just suggestions, that my mental health was negotiable. I know you do, I said softly, stepping closer to him. And I have never asked you to stop talking to her. I have never asked you to cut her out of your life. But this house is my sanctuary. It is the one place in the world where I don't have to defend myself, and I will not surrender it. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what I had to say next. This wasn't a threat, it was a consequence, and I needed him to understand the difference. If you invite her into this house, I said, my voice steady and resolute, I will not stay in my room. I will not hide. I will take the kids and we will go to a hotel for the week. You can have your dinner. You can have your mom. But you will not have us. He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock. You would leave? I would protect my children from a woman who has no respect for their mother, I corrected him. I will not let them see me shrink myself to accommodate her toxicity. I will not teach my daughter that she has to tolerate abuse to keep the peace. And I will not teach my son that it's acceptable for his future partner to be treated the way she treated me. I let the words settle, watching as the reality of the situation finally seemed to penetrate the fog of his denial. This wasn't just about a dinner anymore. It was about respect. It was about our marriage. It was about whether he was going to stand by his wife or fold to the demands of a mother who had never respected either of us. You have a choice, I told him, the finality ringing clear in the quiet kitchen. You can meet her in public. You can rent a kitchen and cook for her there. Or you can bring her here and face the consequences. But the decision is yours, and you need to make it soon. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving him standing there in the silence. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt sick to my stomach, a cold sweat prickling my skin. I had just drawn the hardest line of our entire marriage, and I had no idea if it was going to hold or if it was going to snap and take everything down with it. The next few days were excruciating. The house felt like a minefield. We moved around each other carefully, speaking only about logistics, the kids' schedules, grocery lists, who was picking up who. The silence between us was loud, heavy with the unspoken ultimatum hanging over our heads. I didn't bring it up again. I had said my piece. I had set my boundary. Now, it was entirely up to him. I watched him struggle. I saw him staring at his phone, the screen dark, his jaw clenched tight. I saw him standing in the kitchen late at night, staring at his expensive pots and pans, the tools he had hoped would bridge the gap between him and the mother who had never truly seen him. It was heartbreaking to watch, but I couldn't save him from it. He had to cross this bridge himself. If I pushed him, if I forced his hand, the resentment would eventually poison us. He had to choose me. He had to choose us. And he had to do it because he knew it was the right thing to do, not because I was forcing him. Then, on a Tuesday evening, about 3 weeks before the dreaded June visit, the tension finally snapped. I was in the living room, reading a book, when he walked in. His face was unreadable. He had his phone in his hand, the screen glowing faintly. He sat down on the sofa opposite me, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked exhausted, older somehow than he had looked just a few days ago. The boyish hope was gone, replaced by a grim, hard resignation. I called her, he said. I called her. Those 3 words dropped into the quiet living room like a stone into a still pond. The ripples hit me instantly. My book lowered, my breath hitched, and I waited. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, bracing myself for the impact of whatever came next. He was staring at his hands, his fingers intertwined, knuckles white. The exhaustion on his face was profound. It wasn't just the tiredness of a long day, it was the bone deep weariness of a man who had finally stopped running from the truth. I told her she couldn't come to the house, he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. I told her we could meet at a nice restaurant. I even found a place downtown that does an amazing tasting menu. I offered to pay for everything. I felt a small flicker of relief, a tiny ember of hope. But I didn't let it catch fire just yet. And what did she say? He let out a short, bitter laugh that held absolutely no humor. She said no. He looked up at me then, and the look in his eyes was a mixture of devastation and a terrible dawning clarity. She didn't just say no, he continued, his voice tightening. She asked why. So I told her. I told her that you weren't comfortable having her in the house. I told her that the last time she was here, things ended badly and that we needed to rebuild trust in a neutral setting. You blamed it on me? I asked, a spark of anger cutting through the relief. He shook his head quickly. No, I didn't. I swear. I told her it was our boundary. I said OP and I have decided. But she didn't care about the we. She zeroed right in on you. He took a deep breath, scrubbing a hand over his face. She asked me if I was going to let my wife control who I saw. She asked if you were holding the kids hostage. She said she couldn't believe I was letting you disrespect her like this after she reached out with such a kind and open heart. I closed my eyes. There it was, the exact script I had predicted. The moment the boundary was enforced, the kindness evaporated, revealing the steel trap underneath. She wasn't looking for a fresh start, she was looking for a foothold. And when she was denied entry to my sanctuary, she immediately pivoted to painting me as the villain. And then what happened? I asked softly, opening my eyes to look at him. I tried to stay calm, he said, his voice shaking slightly. I told her that wasn't true. I told her that you had never stopped me from seeing her, that you even suggested the compromise. I reminded her of what happened in 2022. I reminded her about the notice, about the screaming. Did she acknowledge it? He let out another bitter laugh. Are you kidding? She said she didn't remember it that way. She said we were under a lot of stress back then and that we all said things we didn't mean. She said I was dwelling on the past, her exact words, and that if I really wanted to move forward, I would invite her into my home to snuggle those littles. The phrase from the latter echoed in the room, toxic and manipulative. When I told her again that the house was off limits, he continued, his voice dropping an octave. She got cold, ice cold. She told me that if she wasn't welcome in my home, she wasn't coming at all. She said she was canceling the trip. And then she hung up on me. The silence in the room was absolute. The television was off. The kids were asleep. It was just the two of us, sitting in the wreckage of a phone call that had finally, irrevocably shattered the illusion. He looked absolutely broken. The man who had spent weeks researching recipes and picking out wine pairings, hoping to earn his mother's love with a perfectly seared scallop, was sitting in front of me, realizing that his love wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. What she wanted was control. And when she couldn't have it, she punished him by withdrawing entirely. I stood up, crossed the space between us, and sat down next to him on the sofa. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't gloat. There was no victory here. It was just a profound, quiet tragedy. I put my arm around his shoulders and he leaned into me, burying his face in his hands. He didn't cry, but I could feel the tension vibrating through his body. "I'm sorry," I murmured, resting my head against his. "I am so sorry." "She didn't even care about seeing the kids," he whispered, his voice thick with realization. "She used them as a bargaining chip. Let me in the house or I don't see the grandkids." That's not love. That's blackmail." "It is," I agreed gently. "And it's exactly why she couldn't come here. Because a person who loves you respects your boundaries. A person who loves you doesn't make you choose between your wife and your mother. They don't use your children as weapons." We sat there for a long time, the weight of the evening settling over us. The June visit was cancelled. The threat of her presence in our home was gone. The immediate crisis was averted, but the deeper wound, the realization of who his mother truly was raw and bleeding. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the house slowly began to shift. It wasn't an immediate return to normal. My husband was grieving. He was mourning the mother he wished he had, that fresh start he had so desperately wanted to believe in. But as the end of June approached, and the week that was supposed to be filled with tension and eggshells passed quietly, a profound sense of peace began to take root. We reclaimed our space. The kitchen, once a battleground of hypothetical menus and defensive arguments, became ours again. One Saturday evening, he pulled out his pans and started cooking. Not for her, for us. He made the seared scallops. He made the braised short ribs. He poured a beautiful bottle of wine, and we sat at the dining room table. The same table where our 3-year-old had delivered that eviction notice years ago. And we ate. It was, without a doubt, the best meal he had ever cooked. Because this time, it wasn't an audition. It wasn't a peace offering. It was just a man sharing his passion with the family he had chosen to protect. We talked that night, really talked, in a way we hadn't in months. "You were right," he admitted, twirling his wine glass by the stem. "About the letter, about everything. I wanted to see the good so badly that I ignored all the red flags." "It's okay to want to see the good," I told him, reaching across the table to take his hand. "But you can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when they're the one holding the match." He squeezed my hand, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in weeks. "I know, I see that now. And I'm sorry I asked you to compromise your safe space. I should have stood at the gate from the very beginning." "You're standing there now," I said softly. "That's what matters." The letter is still in my possession. I didn't throw it away. I keep it in a file drawer in my home office, tucked away with other important documents. It serves as a reminder. A reminder that toxicity can be beautifully packaged. A reminder that a fresh start without accountability is just a trap. And most importantly, a reminder of the power of a hard boundary. The peace I fought for is back. The quiet mornings, the chaotic, joyful noise of my children playing in the living room, the easy, relaxed evenings with my husband. It all feels earned now. We didn't just survive the storm, we reinforced the foundation of our home so it couldn't be shaken again. I'm sharing this story because I know I'm not the only one. I know there are thousands of people out there holding beautifully written letters, listening to promises of moving forward, and feeling that instinctual knot of dread in their stomachs. If you are dealing with a toxic family member, whether it's a mother-in-law, a parent, or a sibling, I want you to know this. Your peace is not negotiable. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. You do not have to shrink yourself to make them comfortable. A true apology requires changed behavior, and a true relationship requires mutual respect. If they cannot offer those things, you are under no obligation to offer them a seat at your table. So, I have to ask you, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have compromised and let her in the house for the sake of peace? Or would you have held the line, even if it meant risking the relationship? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you handle setting boundaries with difficult family members. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your peace in your own home, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We share stories like this every week. Stories about navigating the messy, complex, and sometimes unbelievable reality of family dynamics.